Imagine the year is 31 BCE. The world's superpower Rome is tearing itself apart in a civil war, and all eyes are on a small coastal area in Greece called Actium. Here, on the Ionian Sea, the fate of the Roman world will be decided. On one side, we have Octavian Caesar, a young but shrewd leader who would later become Augustus, the first Roman emperor. On the other side, we have Mark Antony, a seasoned general, and his ally, Cleopatra VII, the Queen of Egypt. Their alliance wasn't just political, it was also romantic, making this battle not just a clash of armies, but a clash of personal passions. This epic showdown didn't just happen overnight. It was the climax of more than a decade of rivalry between Octavian and Antony, a rivalry that began after the assassination of Julius Caesar in 44 BCE. Caesar's death threw Rome into chaos, leading to the formation of the Second Triumvirate, an uneasy alliance between Octavian, Antony, and Marcus Aemilius Lepidus. Their goal? To hunt down Caesar's assassins and restore order. They succeeded at the Battle of Philippi in 42 BCE, but victory only heightened the tension between these powerful men. With Caesar's assassins defeated, the triumvirate split Rome's territories among themselves. But power has a way of breeding distrust. In 36 BCE, Octavian exiled Lepidus, leaving just him and Antony. By 33 BCE, the alliance was over, and the stage was set for a final confrontation. The Battle of Actium was more than just a fight for control. It was a battle of ideals, personalities, and destinies. Octavian's victory wasn't just a military one, it was also a triumph of propaganda. He skillfully painted Antony as a traitor, a man under the spell of Cleopatra, which made his victory feel inevitable. But the forces that brought them to Actium had been brewing for years, long before they met on that fateful day. The roots of this conflict go back even further, to the time of Julius Caesar and the First Triumvirate, which included Caesar, the wealthy Crassus, and Pompey the Great. This alliance split Rome's vast territories among them, but when Crassus died in battle, Caesar and Pompey's rivalry exploded into civil war. Pompey fled to Egypt, only to be assassinated by Cleopatra's younger brother, Ptolemy XIII, who thought Caesar would be pleased. Instead, Caesar restored Cleopatra to the throne and became her lover, even though he was already married. Their relationship scandalized Rome, especially when Cleopatra bore Caesar a son, Caesarion. When Caesar was assassinated in 44 BCE, Cleopatra and her son fled back to Egypt, leaving Octavian, Caesar's heir, to pick up the pieces. He joined forces with Antony and Lepidus to form the Second Triumvirate and avenge Caesar's death. After defeating Caesar's assassins at Philippi, Antony summoned Cleopatra to Tarsus, where she arrived in all her splendor, captivating Antony and sparking a new fateful romance. And the tension between Octavian and Antony was only getting worse. After their victory against Sextus in 35 BCE, things took a sharp turn. Antony's attempt to secure more territory and redeem Rome's honor in the east ended in disaster. His campaign against Parthia was a total failure, costing him 30,000 men and severely damaging his reputation. Meanwhile, Octavian was riding high, thanks to a series of successful campaigns that bolstered Rome's northeastern borders. Antony's troubles didn't stop on the battlefield. Back in Rome, he was losing support rapidly. His decision to divorce Octavia, Octavian's sister, and marry Cleopatra instead, sent shockwaves through the city. As if that wasn't enough, Antony went on to declare Caesarion, Cleopatra's son by Julius Caesar, as King of Kings, and appointed his own children by Cleopatra as rulers of various territories. It was a bold move, too bold in fact. Most of these regions weren't even under his control, making it clear that Antony was overreaching. By now, the alliance between Octavian and Antony was beyond repair. In 33 BCE, Antony refused to renew his role in the Second Triumvirate, effectively ending it. But Octavian wasn't ready to go head-to-head with Antony just yet. Antony still had plenty of supporters in Rome, and Octavian needed to be strategic. So, he launched a different kind of attack, a war of words. Octavian knew he couldn't directly accuse Antony of treason without backlash. Instead, he focused on Antony's relationship with Cleopatra, painting her as the ultimate villain. He even got his hands on Antony's will, likely by strong-arming the Vestal virgins who were keeping it safe. When Octavian read the contents to the Senate and the people, it was a bombshell. The will supposedly revealed that Antony planned to leave vast amounts of land to his children by Cleopatra, and further elevated Caesarion's claim as Caesar's son. Whether the will was genuine or a forgery didn't matter. Octavian's propaganda was already working its magic. Cleopatra was portrayed as a cunning sorceress, a seductress who had bewitched two of Rome's greatest generals. The people were led to believe that if Antony won, he'd hand over Rome to Cleopatra and move the seat of power to Alexandria. This strategy was incredibly effective. Public opinion turned sharply against Antony, not because of any crime he had committed, but because of his association with Cleopatra. The Senate stripped Antony of his powers, citing national security concerns, and declared war, not on Antony, but on Cleopatra. This clever move allowed Octavian to avoid directly alienating Antony's supporters while positioning himself as Rome's savior. In reality, Octavian knew Antony wouldn't abandon Cleopatra, and that would be his downfall. By defending her, Antony was essentially declaring himself an enemy of Rome, playing right into Octavian's hands. And so, the stage was set for the final act in this epic struggle, with Antony and Cleopatra on one side and Octavian on the other, as the future of Rome hung in the balance. And now let's head to the year before the Battle of Actium, 32 BCE. Antony and Cleopatra were gearing up for their grand showdown with Octavian. They set up their base in Ephesus, which is modern-day Turkey, and wintered there, preparing their forces. Cleopatra didn't just provide moral support, she contributed a massive 20,000 talents to the war effort, a significant sum that bolstered their campaign. Despite their preparation, Antony's officers were concerned. They knew Octavian was a master strategist and suggested Antony distance himself from Cleopatra, who was a controversial figure in Rome. But Antony wouldn't hear of it. Instead, he moved his base to Samos, then transported his army and fleet to Athens by the spring of 32 BCE, where he and Cleopatra joined them. The advice to separate from Cleopatra was ignored. By this point, it seemed impossible to part ways, as he relied heavily on her support. By August 32 BCE, Antony and Cleopatra had moved their forces to Actium, ready for the confrontation. Their army was formidable, with around 60,000 to 63,000 men, including light-armed troops and cavalry, supported by a fleet of 240 ships. Cleopatra's flagship, the Antonia, was among them. Meanwhile, Octavian was preparing for the battle with equal determination. He mustered a large force of 80,000 infantry, 12,000 cavalry, and over 400 ships. His fleet was composed of nimble Liburnian vessels, designed for speed and maneuverability, with powerful rams and catapults to give them an edge in battle. Agrippa, Octavian's trusted commander, led this fleet. In early 31 BCE, Agrippa struck a strategic blow by capturing Methone, cutting off Antony's supplies, and seizing ships and men. He then took Leucas, effectively choking off Antony's supply lines. Antony and Cleopatra found themselves in a precarious position, caught between Octavian's land forces and Agrippa's fleet. Their plan was to engage Octavian's forces at sea and, if necessary, break through Agrippa's blockade and escape to Egypt. On September 2nd, 31st BCE, the battle began. Antony's strategy was to use the wind to push Agrippa's ships south, allowing his own forces to attack Octavian's camp. But Octavian was prepared. Reports from deserters had alerted him to Antony's plan to break through and escape. Agrippa's fleet was arranged in 3 formations, making it difficult for Antony to exploit the wind to his advantage. As the battle unfolded, Antony's ships, large and slow, struggled against Agrippa's swift Liburnians. Agrippa's fleet used their maneuverability to outflank Antony's forces and deploy their harpacks, a device designed to draw enemy ships in close for boarding. The clash was brutal. Antony's flagship was caught by a harpax, and fierce hand-to-hand combat ensued. Despite their efforts to defend, Antony's ships became static targets for Agrippa's nimble vessels. In the heat of the battle, 3 of Antony's squadrons retreated, and others surrendered. Realizing the dire situation, Antony signaled Cleopatra to flee. Cleopatra, with her fleet, broke off and sailed away, leaving Antony to deal with the consequences. The battle turned chaotic as Antony's forces fought desperately but ultimately failed to hold their ground. Agrippa's fleet maintained their positions through the night, accepting the surrender of Antony's remaining ships by morning. Back in Alexandria, Cleopatra was already planning their next move. Understanding that holding Alexandria was not feasible, she suggested fleeing to Spain to gather resources and raise a new army. However, Antony, demoralized and defeated, was in no state to act decisively. By July of 30 BCE, Octavian's forces were at the gates of Alexandria. Antony, roused from his despondency, managed to launch a counterattack but was ultimately abandoned by his troops. Upon hearing false news of Cleopatra's death, Antony took his own life, but he died in Cleopatra's arms when she was still alive. Cleopatra, realizing her fate, decided against being paraded in Octavian's triumph. Instead, she took her own life on August 30th BCE. Octavian honored her wish to be buried alongside Antony, and then executed Caesarion, Cleopatra's son, with Julius Caesar. Cleopatra's children were taken to Rome, paraded as captives, and eventually raised by Octavia, Antony's first wife. With Cleopatra and Antony gone, Octavian was hailed as the savior of Rome. He took control of Egypt and its vital grain supplies, presenting himself as a protector of Rome. To solidify his position and avoid the pitfalls that led to Julius Caesar's downfall, he carefully managed his image. By January 27 BCE, Octavian resigned his powers only to have them restored by the Senate under the title Augustus, marking the dawn of the Roman Empire.